Yo, what's cracking? This your homeboy Ice Cube, and you tuned in to Everything Snowboarding and More podcast. You know what it is, baby.
Hey everybody, this is Mike with the Mountain Weekly News. Welcome back to episode number 46 of the Everything Snowboarding and More podcast. This week's podcast guest is Jib Hunt. Jib is the new owner of Kemper Snowboards. Yes, I said Kemper Snowboards, that brand from the 80s, 90s. They are back. And you're going to definitely want to check out their boards this year. This week's podcast is also being sponsored by Kemper Snowboards, which is a perfect fit. Jib's going to talk all about the new gear coming out this year and much more. Thanks for tuning in. All right, well, let's start this episode off. This is episode number 46 of the Everything Snowboarding and More podcast. This week's special guest is Jib Hunt. Jib is the new owner of Kemper Snowboards. And first of all, Jib, is your real name Jib? How on earth is somebody that's a professional snowboarder? Is this kind of a moniker? Where did this come from?
Yeah, so it's not my legal name. My given legal name is actually Steven, but a funny story, back when I was a pro rider, I rode for a company called Jib 686 Enterprises, and everyone started calling me Jib. That was back when I was 18. And Mike, the owner of the company, eventually chopped off Jib and Enterprises, and that's the company everyone knows as 686.
Wow, that's a killer backstory. And whereabouts was this?
It was back in, what year was it? Like 1998. So that's when I grew up in the Northeast. So I was in New Hampshire then, but I rode for 686, and they're still based in California.
Right, for sure. Yeah, I know the California connection, so I was wondering. Talk about your background you said you were a professional snowboarder. What kind of competitions and, what was your background there?
Yeah, so I grew up in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, and I started snowboarding in 1987. Actually, my second board in 1988 was a Kemper Rampage, so that's a little fun piece of information. I actually rode a Kemper, and I started when I was 12 years old in 87, and my friends and I in my hometown of North Conway, New Hampshire, we were like the first snowboarders at our home resort, which was Cranmore Mountain, and we switched from skiing. We were kind of bored with it. We skateboarded in the summer, and we quickly just, pushed each other, and we got better really fast. And a couple of years later, I think when I was 14 or 15, I was sponsored as an amateur, was getting product and everything, and then snowboarding was really starting to pick up some momentum as a sport. And by the time I was 17, I was a paid sponsored professional and was traveling over the U.S. and Canada, and I mostly did big air, slope style, and border cross and half pipe every now and then.
Did you feel it was a tighter knit community back in the day? I mean, if it was just you and your friends that were at the mountain, like if you saw somebody else with a snowboard, like were they kind of instantly part of the crew? I mean, we were like, oh man, like what are you doing? Like what are you riding? And it obviously stood out at that time.
Yeah, definitely. We were the minority, and skateboarding went through that whole phase as well. There's probably like 5, 6 of us to start, and after a couple of years, I mean, we started in middle school and high school, but by the end of high school, there's a pretty big group of snowboarders, and even the surrounding towns that rode at our mountain that went to different high schools. Yeah, it was like an immediate, there might be 10, 20 snowboarders on the resort, and all the rest were skiers, so we all knew each other, and we all hung out and rode together.
Well, I like that you mentioned Kemper Snowboards. When I was growing up riding, I never actually had a Kemper snowboard, but I remember one day I was at Snow Summit up in Southern California, and there was an old, I forget what I'm going to ask my mom to pull it out of the closet, but one of the classic, 80s Kemper boards, and, kind of a square tail and a round, bigger nose. And I was like, this is the coolest thing I'd ever seen. I wasn't really a part of snowboarding at that point. I was kind of still skiing. And let's kind of fast forward to Kemper Snowboards now. Obviously, you've taken over the brand. You're the new owner. But you guys have this full retro thing that's going on with the line. Kind of explain why you're doing that and, how that's unique right now within the industry, I think.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I started riding in 87, and, my buddies and I, we would ride every day. And when the resorts were closed, we'd build jumps in our backyards. We watch all the snowboard movies, watch all the pros. We knew everything. We'd just like study, go, and then go apply it. West Coast riders, East Coast riders, and that was just like ingrained in our life. And then I remember those days, and everyone, basically I'd say 35 and older, it was just a really fun time back there. We're pioneering a sport, and then it just really caught on, and it was kind of the glory days, I call it, of snowboarding. And it's like the happy place of snowboarding. Not that it's not fun now, it is just so different then, because it was all so new, and everyone that was riding a snowboard was helping pave the way. So fast forward to today, in my opinion, just snowboarding, you looked at, all the brands and the graphics and contests and just the whole culture of it. It's just it got a little bit mediocre, in my opinion. And so it needed a little, kick in the ass to bring back a little bit of the stoke and fun of the early days. And, Sims, they're back, and they came back before Kemper did. So I saw that they were making an attempt to bring back an old brand. And there's lots of groups on Facebook, especially like Take My Quiver and Snowboard Trader. Again, all the 35 and older snowboarders who were collecting all the boards we used to ride back in the day. So there's definitely this nostalgia of snowboarding that people were latching onto in the older groups. And then ironically, at the same time, just like it always happens, they use fashion as the example, but fashion recycles itself. And the younger kids have really latched on to everything that was in the 80s and 90s, and brands have brought back all their old stuff. So combination of all that really just, I took a break from working in the industry for a bunch of years, and I wanted to do something to get back into it, but also just, make a difference, I'd say, in the sport, and bring back a brand that was fun back in the day and a lot of people remembered and had a good vibe to it. And that was kind of the premise for it, bringing back all the old graphics and just having fun with the brand and getting people excited about snowboarding, and even the younger crowd, just giving them a history lesson of, what did happen back in the day.
I like that you mentioned, a history lesson, because that's truly what it is. I mean, Ryan recently reviewed the Rampage split, and I think he started it off by saying, like, Kemper is making splitboarding fun again, or snowboarding fun again. And, like, honestly, like, when I see those boards, or we take one on the resort, or we take one out splitboarding, people just, they light up. And especially, like you said, it's not, for the most part, it's the older people that really get it. But now everything comes full circle. I remember 5 years ago, my friend started a fanny pack company and went to OR, and he had all these really bright colors. And I was like, no way, dude. Like, that's from the 80s. And it just took off. Everyone's like, oh, this is like what's new. Or like, I'm sure if you went to Coachella or any of the like popular music festivals, we're going to start seeing more of that bright, where, snowboarding, especially different parts of the, country. I mean, I remember when I moved to Mount Baker, I moved up there, I was wearing a bright yellow jacket, and everyone was just like, whoa, bro. Everyone's, wearing all black, and, and even the snowboards, everything kind of looked the same for a while. And I think, recently it's kind of the all white top sheets, or, it all looks very similar. And I don't know that any other brand could kind of pull off what you guys are doing. And partially it's really because of like who you are and your background in the sport, because that shows that authenticity. I don't know that somebody could just buy a brand and say, okay, cool, I know what's hot now. It's like, let's go back to the 80s models. Like, they wouldn't even really understand why, the profiles are as they are. Speaking of profiles, what do you typically like to ride? Like, what is your go-to profile just on a daily basis?
The board I've been riding the most, or the camber profile, it's goes right along with this is it's actually a setback camber, taking it, not a traditional camber, but basically it's camber under feet with early rise. So I ride the SR, the Surf Rider, a lot, which has that camber profile, and it's just surfy and fun and playful. You can ride it on groomers and carve. You can hit jumps. You can ride switch. And then I rode it up last year in your neck of the woods. I was at Natural Selection. It dumped 3 feet, and I rode that, and it just plows through the powder. So that camber under feet is, with early rises, has kind of been my favorite go-to. And actually for next year, we are bringing back the freestyle in its original shape, and that will also have camber under feet with early rise.
It's great to see the snowboard industry, for the most part as a whole, I would say 90% of the brands really starting to re-embrace camber, especially like you mentioned, camber underfoot and having that stability. I mean, sure, some early rise is great, but when it comes down to it, there was really nothing wrong with camber. And I think the snowboard industry almost got stale, and it was like, well, what can we do? Like, I remember that time where I grew up, everybody was riding camber and they really knew how to make, really nice turns. And, you see anybody that snowboarded in the 80s or early 90s, like they actually know how to turn. And then the reverse camber thing came and everybody was like, you could almost wash out on jumps, and it was a very different style of riding. I think right now there's only a couple brands that are really sticking to that, reverse camber, or just don't want to go full camber. Never Summer is one of the brands that for years I begged them. I said, you guys are making these split boards. I said, this crazy rocker camber fusion profile underfoot, like you get on a skin track and that rocker, you start sliding backwards. I was like, you have to make a cambered split board. And they had gotten into a lawsuit with LibTech, many moons ago about the whole, rocker camber versus banana. And they sued each other, and both brands kind of held on to it for so long. And I think this year, Never Summer now has a full cambered split board and full cambered snowboards in the line, which was something that just for years they were like, we're not making camber. And for people that are older, it's like everybody I know now, for the most part, is on a cambered board, unless they just really fell in love with that rocker. But, it goes full circle.
Yeah, it's like you said, everyone years ago had to learn on camber, and it just made you a better rider. And, you could definitely, you can tell. I was riding earlier today at Park City. It just drives me nuts. These kids that just fly by super fast, and they're just washing their turns the whole way. They couldn't stop quick if their life depended on it, and there's no nice S turns. And yeah, I think in a way, all the different rocker profiles is kind of like having training wheels, but it's made people's riding a little bit sloppy. For sure in the park and rails, yeah, there's definitely a use for that, 100%. But yeah, taking it back to what works and what's going to make a board more stable in all conditions. That's kind of like what we're all about. We do have some boards that have rocker, and our Rampage has a park camber, which is more of a wavy profile. It's got a bunch of zones with camber and rocker. But for us, it's more about having different options for different riders. But you'll see next year, we're actually, for next year, we're changing the flight, which is camber and rocker currently. But next year, it's actually going to be traditional camber.
Solid. You mentioned training wheels. I'd never really heard of it that way. I remember the first time specifically I got one of the reverse camber boards, never ridden one before. I was living in Vail. It was a powder day. We go out and I'm like popping off everything, and everyone's like, dude, you are killing it right now. And I was like, honestly, it's the snowboard. Like, it was different. And like you said, learning how to snowboard on camber and how to use an edge, that's kind of like where I think some of the best snowboarders actually come from, a ski background. And especially like that ski race background, or somebody that learned to ski on the East Coast, you learn how important edges are. And, at times, I just got this Capita full cambered board, and edges were so sharp. I actually took it to the shop and I was like, man, you guys got to help me detune this, because it was like that camber grip and that camber, that you want, but then just a little extra. And it was, I think LibTech a few years ago, they referred to it when they went and did a full cambered board. It was Tomahawk technology. And that person that just might not be used to camber is going to jump on that and be like, whoa, okay, this is a lot more responsive. And just that little tiny, putting it on the toe, it's like that board's going to move now. And so it's really cool to see, what that you guys have picked up on that as well.
Yeah, it's kind of like take it back to basics, but I'm all about like, I'd rather have, as many people like really know how to like maximize their snowboard in all conditions. And then, like if you are stepping it up and doing some pretty hairy stuff in the park, if you learned on full camber and then take your park board, it's definitely, you're going to have, those are the riders that are going to be far superior than the others, just because you have to be on point, put it that way, when you're on a full camber board.
It's like skateboarding, right? Like skateboarding, landing on the bolts. Like you either have that or you don't. And like you're not going to like be 50-50 on the camber and pull it off. It's like you have to be 100% on it. And where are you guys you guys are based in Salt Lake now, correct?
Yeah, we're actually in Heber City. So we are, if you drive up from Salt Lake to Park City and then you drive past it 20 minutes down the road, we're in Heber City.
Sweet. And do you find yourself going up to the local resorts there or touring? What's kind of your go-to being based in Heber City?
Yeah, I was at Park City Resort this morning. It's all highway. So that's the one thing that I love about having the office down here, and I live in Midway, which is the next town over, is it doesn't matter what the snow conditions are. You can just hop on the highway, 20 minutes, you get into Park City, and then you're there. And it's I love Snowbird, I love Brighton, but for us to drive over there, you have to really plan it and go early. And if anyone, as everyone knows, that access roads up to the Cottonwoods, the weather gets bad, one accident, and it shuts down. So it's just great having the highway here so I can get up to the mountain wherever I want. And then I live on the Wasatch back, so actually there's an access road that's open in the summertime that's right at the street from my house, and I can drive up it. And when I get to this intersection, about 8,000 feet up, I can go right, and it takes me down to Park City through Deer Valley. And if I go left, it goes down to Brighton. It's not accessible in the wintertime, but that area is where everyone goes sledding and split boarding. You can drive up with a sled, and then you hop on your split board, and it's lots of backcountry up there.
Man, you just gave out one of your secret spots. Is that one of the inner connectors that they've been talking about doing in the kind of Utah area of merging, letting you kind of European style, like ski from resort to resort?
Yeah, it would be up in that area for sure. Yeah, just because Snowbird, Brighton, all of those, Deer Valley, not that you can go snowboarding at Deer Valley, but at those peaks up there, that's where it goes down to the other side. So yeah, if there was, for example, a lift down on this side, you could get up there and then head over to Brighton. And then, you could, if they wanted to get super fancy, it could get you to the other resorts like Solitude, Snowbird. I don't know the exact schematics, but yeah, that area is where a connector could happen. And even, you could go the other way over to Park City as well. So I think that's many moons out from ever happening, if it did happen, but it's definitely right here.
Well, and you mentioned the access with the highway. Utah and that kind of Salt Lake up to the mountains, it's such a unique area where you can actually fly into an international airport, grab your bags, and then I think, I don't know if they're still doing it, was like free lift tickets the day that you arrived. And like you said, it's like, even if it's a gnarly storm, like just going down to Salt Lake isn't going to be the biggest issue, or going from, where you guys are living or from the office up, and it seems like, yeah, obviously going to Snowbird, You know, what I remember about Snowbird is the whole interlodge thing. And just, I used to think Colorado, it snowed a lot. And we went to Snowbird for a North Face Masters comp, and it snowed, I think, 65 inches in 2 days. And the head of ski patrol comes up and he holds a beacon up in our meeting. And he's like, if you own one of these, like, I recommend you wear it today. I was just like, what the? Like, I thought I knew where there was good snow. And then the whole interlodge, and then at times, you know, staying down in the city and then trying to get up to the mountain. It was like, okay, you better be on the road by 5, and you better hit that gate before the road gets shut for avalanche work. And so it's definitely an interesting place that you guys have. You can just go up these highways, and, you know, obviously you get into the canyons, it slows down a little bit, but that's really cool that you're able to, you know, be so close to the mountains. You know, a lot of the brands are based in cities, and, you know, they're kind of out of touch. Our new office here in town, we're a block and a half from Snow King. So I love nothing more than a new board arrives, I get it mounted up and go take it out. Or I, you know, jump on my sled and it's, you know, 5-minute car ride, and then take my sled out and go split board. So it's really unique. And I think that also kind of shows with what you guys are doing, because again, like, you're a snowboarder, you're riding this stuff. Sometimes there is that disconnect with the brands where it's like, oh, well, let's just make a board like this. And it's like, for instance, some of the really short, fat split boards. I was like, if you actually went out and toured on these, you'd be like, this isn't the most efficient tool. Yes, you took a board that was really popular in your line, and it was, you know, the 150 or whatever, 148, and then all of a sudden you're like, I'm just going to make a split board out of this. It's like, that might not work as well. And so it's really rad to see that, you know, the boards that we've ridden from you guys so far are killer. I think I've got the Surfer on the way. You guys are doing bindings too. And again, the bindings have that really rad colorway. What's the background on the bindings?
Yeah, we have, this winter was the first winter we introduced a binding, and I wanted to basically build or offer the first binding and start from the ground up and come in with a really good price point, with a good binding, obviously, that's going to hold up. And on top of that, I wanted the colors to be very Kemper-esque. One of the colorways, the black colorway, actually is a remake of the 91-92 Kemper binding, which is black with the purple and yellow straps. So anyone listening, they'll probably know if they had those bindings back in the day. And then the second colorway is basically just a mix of the 3 Kemper colors, the pink, the green, and the blue. But yeah, it's, again, I get lots of compliments, and it's just, they're bright, it's different, and it's, you know, our aesthetic.
I'm just smiling thinking of the bindings. And when you said, you know, the black and purple, I was like, oh, I know exactly what he's talking about. That kind of leads me to, you know, you were talking about, you know, people being stoked. How has the response been overall about Kemper Snowboards? And then especially like when people see you with a board that is certainly going to stand out amongst every other board that's being made right now.
Yeah, I mean, at first, you know, there are a lot of skeptical people. You have to deal with, oh, you know, is this stuff crap? Is it, you know, just a cash grab? Like, who's doing all this? You know, I had to deal with all that in the first to second year. But my thing was, you know, first and foremost, work with a great factory. So we make all our boards at the GP87 factory, where a lot of really good snowboard and ski brands are made. So I tell everyone, at the end of the day, take all the graphics off, the board shapes and the way they ride. That's got to be first and foremost. And then the fun part is now you apply all the Kemper graphics, and that's where, you know, at first people get excited and stoked, where, oh, I had that board, or they've never seen it before, and it's so bright, and the graphics are so different than what else is out in the market. So that's kind of the visual brings them in. But then when they ride the boards, I've gotten lots of compliments on just how the board rides. So, I mean, it's just the double whammy of having graphics that people get excited about. But then the part 2 of that is when someone actually rides it and we get the feedback that, hey, I've ridden XYZ board from other brands, and they're big name brands, and they tell us they like our boards better. I mean, that's what it's all about. And this kind of ties back into, we're here to help the sport of snowboarding grow, and I just want to get more people involved with it and stoke people out with our products.
I'm glad that you mentioned the GP87 factory. Ben and those guys, they're doing an incredible job. And every board lately that we get from them, I mean, they ride well. And the construction, I mean, it's really tight. And there was that pushback for a while where people were like, oh, I don't want stuff made in China. And then slowly but surely, when we started figuring out like who was making the boards, it's like, look, there's like 3 factories out there. You got maybe a couple dudes in the US making boards, but for the most part, there's a few, Dubai and Austria and China. And it's like, how's the board ride, first of all? And then, secondly, the look. But I can see right now with Kemper where people are going to be like, wow, like they're going to be drawn to that, A, for the nostalgia part, and then B, like, man, if I was a young 20-something-year-old kid and I just showed up and I'm like, oh, what am I going to buy? And I saw that, I'm like, that's probably more my style. It almost goes back to that punk rock and surf and skate and just being a little bit different. I mean, even the outerwear, we're starting to see the colors come back. I've got a bunch of jackets right now, and they kind of stand out, and it's fun.
Well, it's funny you mentioned the outerwear, because we're not done with just the boards and the bindings. Next year, we're bringing back all the outerwear. We're going to have helmets. We're going to have goggles. We're going to have the bags, the board bags. We're taking it all back to where it began, and it's going to be fun starting next year, with just, having just more Kemper stuff that they made back in the day.
We're stoked telling the Kemper story. How does one go and find a legacy snowboard brand? I mean, were you friends with Davey? Did you just make a call and say, hey man, like, what's up? Can I buy this or license it from you? This seems pretty unique, and especially somebody that was, a rider. You're not just some like big, hedge fund coming in, or some, big company that's like, oh, snowboarding's hot. Like, I want to get into snowboarding. Like, what can we buy? How did that relationship happen? And how did you end up as the owner of a brand that, is part of the history of snowboarding?
Yeah. So David Kemper, he started the company in his garage. He was still in high school and he was building boards. I think he actually started tinkering around with boards, I think around 83, and then he started making them by hand, and then he got a business partner, and they officially incorporated in 1987. And then they sold the company, him and his business partner, they sold the company, and David still stayed on, and that was kind of the prime years of Kemper. And then it got sold and transferred to another company where Lamar and 5150, they were brands there as well. And I don't know the 100% the exact date, but around 1995-ish, they went out of business. They shut everything down. And that was kind of the end of it. And what I did was, because the trademark had been dead for 20 plus years, I just went through the proper channels of securing the trademark, because everyone, the last people that owned it just let it die. And that's how a lot of brands have been able to be resurrected, is if someone is able to secure the trademark and go through the proper channels and steps to get it. And then that's one way to do it. So I was lucky enough that was a way, the path for me to get it. And then the rest is kind of history from there. And I reached out to David, let him know what I was doing, and he was great. He sent me a lot of his original stuff, like catalogs and certificate of incorporation, rolls of film that weren't developed or that needed to be developed into prints, and all the catalogs. So it was pretty cool. And actually, him and his 2 brothers and their entire family, all their kids, they're all riding Kemper again.
Wow, sick. I like the patent angle. I mean, that definitely seems a lower cost of entry to get in with these brands. Do you see brands like Lamar or Wave Rave or 5150 or any of these brands, coming back? I mean, with what you're doing with Kemper right now, have you heard other people be like, oh, dude, like, what's up with such and such? Like, I haven't seen, aggression or whatever it is. Like, how about I want to get into the industry. This is a pathway that exists again.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely probably brands out there. I know, for example, like Burton, they bought, they bought Forum and Special Blend and Foursquare, and then they let those trademarks run out. And then I think, I'm pretty sure I've seen some stuff out of company, was able to secure the clothing, but Burton was able to hold on to Forum. And that was a trademarking process. I've heard there's a guy who wanted to bring back Joyride, which would be, in my opinion, that would be another company I would love to have brought back. I actually rode for Joyride. That was another fun brand, but I don't know the status of that. So yeah, there's brands out there that fall into probably the same category where it could be done. So I mean, in my opinion, step one is, A, are you able to get it? And it does take some money to properly trademark everything. But then B is it the right person to bring it back and to bring it back the right way? And that's what I wanted. It's like my number one mission and goal with Kemper was if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it the right way and bring it back so it's authentic. So that would be my advice to anyone who's thinking about doing it is, if you're going to bring back an old brand, just, try to keep it as authentic as possible.
Yeah, make sure you actually snowboard if you're going to come up with this business plan. Probably going to help you out, right?
Yeah, for sure. Or any type of company, doesn't have to be just snowboarding, but, if it's a watch company or footwear or clothes, have some knowledge of it or know people that have a knowledge of it. For me, this was like a no-brainer just because I lived through all this. I knew the history of the brand. I rode the boards, and I loved the sport of snowboarding since I was 12. So it was a perfect thing for me to do, and I love what I'm doing. But yeah, I would just, anyone who wants to do that with anything, it's just like, make sure you do it the right way.
Okay, so right now on your website, kemper-snowboards.com, people can buy boards, people can buy split boards. Along with the boards, like you have the option of the 2021 graphic, or you can buy that same board with the retro graphics. And is that across the entire line?
For this year, yes. It was every model we offered in a new 21-22 graphic, which still has all the bright neon colors and then retro vibe type of graphics. So every model has that, and then every model has a original retro graphic offering as well. So, and it's funny because it's kind of split down the middle, almost like people buying the old graphic and the new graphic, which is good because I brought the brand back with all the originals, and now we're slowly morphing into newer, unique graphics because I want to evolve the brand. But I will always bring in some of those classic graphics and maybe change up colorways just to keep, have some OG flavor every season.
I love it. So boards, bindings, split boards right now, and then next year
we have split board skins too.
And the skins, and those are the Cola skins, is that correct?
No, those are Kemper skins made by Montana.
Oh, but the Montana skins, even better. Okay, yeah, that's right. I think we tested some other skins. The Montana skins, I would say when they're working, they're my favorite pair out there. Obviously, everything's weather dependent, and when we talk about skins, I'm like, man, the skins are great until they're not. And I actually think there's room in the industry for somebody to make a pair of like foldable emergency type skins, like something that's not going to take up any room in your pack. I have never actually gone out splitboarding with a second set of skins, but I've probably had 50 plus days where my skins have completely failed and I've had to just, ski strap it down. And so, it'd be cool to see that. And it's great that you guys are actually teaming up with a skin manufacturer because, again, that shows that you're a splitboarder. You actually snowboard. So many of these brands, most of them are starting to understand that. But for the last 4 or 5 years, I'm like, look, you're asking the consumer to like go out and just randomly get skins and then, as opposed to like, hey, these are coming, direct. These are our skins. This is for these boards. And I think that's going to be definitely the future of the industry where, you want to make things easy. And especially with splitboarding, there's so much stuff to buy. And I see people come in all the time and they buy a split board and they're like, okay, what skins do I need to buy now? And then there's a bunch of skins. And so to see you guys doing it all kind of in-house, that's killer. Well, Jib, I really appreciate you dialing in and chatting with us today. It's killer that, you've brought back one of these just really core legacy brands. And it does take somebody that really lives the life and walks the walk. So yeah, congratulations on what you guys are doing with Kemper. Really stoked to try the new stuff. We're about to go into another big powder cycle here in Jackson, and then got a lot of traveling. And yeah, I look forward to kind of rocking the Kemper snowboards. And again, it's just one of those, to see those designs and those colors come back for somebody that's a little older, it's rad. And then I think you're going to touch, like you said, it's 50-50. You have people being like, oh, I want like the old retro modern graphic. And then people that are like, no, I want the old, like more black and like more a little bit core, and or the darker blue. There was just that certain colorways that were happening in the industry for a long time, and definitely got stale for a while. So I appreciate you and Kemper and everybody involved for really kind of making it fun again. And I don't know that it ever wasn't fun, but it's definitely, there's a lot of stoke right now. And I think, as snowboarders, we're kind of getting older, and that's a thing that I never really thought of, that I don't know if the young kids that are coming up these days, it seems like all my friends that have kids, they're kind of starting them on skis. And at that point, they really aren't making the transition to snowboarding. And so I think and I hope that there is room for that younger audience. But I also know there's a lot of people that have been doing this for a while, and they're going to continue to do it for the next 20, 30 years. So there's plenty of audience and people that, that Kemper, that's up there with Sims, and like you said, Joyride, and the Barfoot and those legacy brands. So
yeah, no, there's a lot of room to grow actually with the sport. Most people, I bring this up a lot recently, some people probably think of it, but like if you think about like Jake Burton, Tom Sims, Chuck Barfoot, Dmitry Milovich, all those guys, David Kemper, obviously Tom and Jake aren't living anymore, but they'd be in their 60s, Chuck's in his 60s. Those guys are all like first generation snowboarders. And I'm 46, so I'm technically still in that first generation. And Jake's kids, they're older than my kids, but they're second generation, and my kids are second generation. So if you think about it, snowboarding's not really that old compared to skiing. So go down the line 3, 4, 5, 6 generations, and there's that many more kids that will turn into adults across the world, and then they'll have kids, and the sport's going to get bigger and bigger. Skiing as an industry has 100 plus years into that.
No, it is. And, as, surfing, the popularity of surfing, and it almost seems like, skateboarding is coming back. I think skateboarding is in the Olympics, or it was in the Olympics. And so it's, the board sports. I think that the designs, when I was a skier in the 90s, I looked at snowboarding, and that's when it was really wild and more punk rock, and people just living that lifestyle of, I grew up surfing, and it was like, oh, these guys are doing the same thing on snow. I hope, and I think we're going to start to see that where, people are going to be a little bit more free, or, God, I just had Rankwood on the podcast, and like, we were just able to talk about like how it used to be. And he's one of those guys that's continuing to keep it real. And it's like, I think that we'll start to see that more. And sometimes I wonder where, all these people that were a part of the industry have gone. I'm like, I don't think they just stopped snowboarding, but maybe they're working construction, or they're doing other things. And so hopefully as the reemergence starts coming, and the different gear and the different brands, people will be like, oh man, I haven't been out in a while, but like, look, these guys are making boards. Like, I'm going to hit them up. I'm going to get a board. It's easy for me to sit here and just be in the office for a week, and I forget about snowboarding. And then I go out, I'm like, whoa, I love snowboarding so much. You get on the right equipment, and with a good La Nina year, like we're having pretty much all the, north up. It's game on. A couple really big winters, that can also help the sport versus, you get a couple years where people are over it and they're not skiing, it's like you see that the next year. It's like, well, the amount of boards, somebody's like, man, last year sucked. I only went up, 2 times. Like, is that person going to buy a new board versus somebody that's like, man, I rode 20 days last year and I got my collective pass and I traveled to all these places. And so, yeah, it's just, snowboarding is fun. I'm glad you see that. And again, just looking at the boards, man, I smile, I get stoked. I'm like, okay, this is what brought me into snowboarding originally. And so to see that coming back, it's like, well, of course, that's where I'm going to gravitate to. And I definitely know I'm not alone in that.
Yeah, no, definitely. I listened to the Rank With podcast, and it's funny. Just the stuff he was saying, I was laughing at a lot of it because I agree with what he's saying, and I still no high backs. Like I remember those days when we all tried to no high backs, and he's still running in. He was one of the guys when I was a kid that we watched the videos, and him and Roach and Cardiel on the West Coast and Slasnick, and then all the Burton guys and Noah Brandon and all of them on the East Coast. So yeah, and that was that crew, that era. I mean, when I started Kemper back up, I mean, if you look on the website, you'll see Kurt Heine, Martin Gallant, JD Platt, Joe Curtis. Those guys all rode for Kemper back in the day. Jake Blattner, I just sent him aboard. So he rode Kemper. It's funny, a lot of these pros that came up in the mid-90s to early 2000s, like a lot of them actually, they bought a Kemper or even were sponsored by Kemper, and a lot of people wouldn't even know that.
That's killer. And I mean, you give those guys boards and they start riding it and people are like, dude, what are you riding? And I mean, I always laugh, that way you get the right ambassadors or the right people riding your gear and people are like, okay, like either like that guy looks cool, that's what I want, or, I want to snowboard like that guy. Like I remember, n.w.a and the Solomon 6 stick. I was like, I'm buying that board because that's exactly the kind of snowboarding I want to do. Well, okay, once again, Kemper-snowboards.com. Do you guys do much on social media, or what's kind of the best way if somebody wanted to reach out to you guys or just grab one of your boards or more information?
Yeah, I mean, our Instagram is our number one channel, Instagram or Facebook. People write in all the time. We write back, or off the website. It's info@Kemper-snowboards. People write in, or even our chat. So we make sure we get back to everyone as best as possible. Sometimes we don't. We miss a couple people, but yeah, our whole thing is just to be responsive and be nimble and keep people excited. I mean, that's kind of another strategy about being small is once companies get so big, they kind of forget and are not as attentive, and we want to always be as attentive as possible to the snowboarding community.
Well, I personally appreciate that. You actually had reached out to me and I didn't even really know what was going on with Kemper. And I think a lot of times it's easy for companies to hire, marketing people or to have people that aren't in-house. And those are the people telling the story of the brand. And it gets a little convoluted pretty quickly because you're like, okay, like these people actually aren't participants. And so, when I got an email from a guy named Jib and he's talking about Kemper Snowboards, I was like, I'm going to open this email. Like this doesn't look to be fake. So I really appreciate you reaching out. We're super stoked on all the gear that you guys are making. Next time you find yourself in Jackson, let me know. I'd love to go out and take you splitboarding and go on a little tour or go up to the village. And just keep it up, man. It's really rad to see what you guys are doing. And Kemper Snowboards, you guys are back. Great. Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate you having me and talking about Kemper on your podcast. Right on. Thanks again, Jib. Thanks. Alrighty. All right, well, that was a killer interview that we did with Jib. For more information on Kemper, once again, visit Kemper-snowboards.com. At the very least, just go on the website and take a look at the boards. If you're listening to this podcast and you're over, 35, 40, you're going to be stoked. You're going to smile. You're going to be like, man, I probably should just buy one of these. And they ride sick. So Kemper-snowboards.com.